most single people don't have a lot of sex.
The phrase that I use in the book to describe this exact phenomenon, where you on the one hand have hypersexual public life. You can walk down any street and see women in lingerie on posters or watch TV, and there's very explicit sex scenes, etc. So on the one hand, we've had this amazing ramping up of sexuality in public life. But on the other hand, exactly as you say, we have what's sometimes called the sex recession, the fact that people are having sex later, less frequently. I think what's happening generally is people are having probably more casual sex, but they're having sex less frequently. So when they are having sex, it's more likely to be casual, but they're not forming these long-standing relationships. And the term that I use in the book is cultural death grip syndrome, taken from the quasi-medical term death grip syndrome, which is used by compulsive porn users to describe the physical experience of impotence when you use too much porn. You get to the point where you actually can't be aroused either physically or psychologically in real life because you use so much porn. And I think cultural death grip syndrome is the counterpart to that, where on the one hand we have this astounding availability of sexual stimuli at the click of a button at any moment. Anything that you can imagine is available on the internet immediately. And that seems to be demotivating people to actually seek out meaningful sexual relationships, which in the long term are vastly better for us in every possible way. But we have a culture enabled by technology, which is very, very short term in every way. So people are channeled towards that kind of immediate relief that disincentivizes proper,
I think the rule is something like unearned surfeit turns into revulsion. Right. It's too much of a good thing means that it's no longer a good thing. And that, and that goes along with an idea too, that there's something like optimal deprivation, right? I mean, look, let's say you've just had a big banquet and someone sits you down and says, well, now you have to eat 5 pounds of dessert. It's like, first of all, that's not going to be a very attractive proposition. And second of all, it might actually make you ill, is that everything has to be in proper proportion. And one of the things we really haven't contended with at all in our society is how much desperation is necessary on the sexual front to drive young men and young women together. And the answer is not zero. And the problem with pornography, one of many problems, is that it drives desperation on the male front down to zero. Now, I know perfectly well from my clinical experience that the standard state of most young men, especially under 20, let's say, is pretty much terror in the face of a woman who they're very attracted to. And the reason for that is that, there's all sorts of reasons, but the primary reason is the probability that any given male, even one who's very attractive, let's say in multiple ways, is going to be rejected by any given female, especially a high-value female who has a lot of people attracted to her, is extremely high. So there are classic psychological experiments showing this. If you send attractive undergraduates out to talk to other undergraduates to offer sexual access, say, well, would you be willing to have coffee with me? Would you be willing to give me your phone number? Would you be willing to come back to my apartment? If the girls offer that, then whoever they're offering that to on the male front will take them up on their offer. But if the boys offer that, even when they're attractive, the probability that their advances will be rejected is extremely high. And so young men face the uncomfortable situation where even if they're competent and will turn eventually into useful men, which isn't the status of most very young men, the probability that they'll be rejected is extremely high. And then it's also the case that there's little that's more psychologically impactful than such rejection, especially if it's undertaken by someone to whom there's a genuine attraction. So that means that boys are paralyzed into terror. I think that's not too exaggerated a term, by the mere fact of attractive women. And so, they slough that off and they make derogating jokes and so forth to try to get over that, but doesn't change the basic reality. And that also means that a certain percentage of males, and it's not low, really, it could easily be like 30% are just paralyzed into utter stasis. by the possibility of rejection, especially because they haven't been fortified against it with their dependency-inducing upbringing. Unless they're driven forward by a certain amount of desperation, some of which needs to be sexual, they're never going to break through that barrier. And so then they can satisfy themselves momentarily with pornography, and then that turns into that host of problems you already described. As now they're training themselves, maybe right from puberty, to be impotent, cuckold voyeurs, essentially. So that's not good training. Then they're training themselves to view women as targets of short-term gratification. So that's like training in psychopathy. And then they're also interfering with their ability to establish a relationship and also to perform sexually in a real environment. So all that seems like, like a five-dimensional catastrophe. And that's going to get a lot worse in the next year, by the way, because we haven't seen anything on the pornography front compared to what's going to be coming down with the advent of AI.